Go.
Herb, you know, one of the great things about AAPOR is that it is unique as an organization in that it brings together people from academia and from the business world. And you're an exemplar of that tradition, having gone from a university-focused career into one, first in a quasi-governmental agency and then on into business, the commercial world. How did you, looking back retrospectively, how did you happen to make that transition?
Well, you know, I'm prepared for that question. This is like memory lane. I thought back over that situation myself. And as you say, I was in academic life and in government, quasi-government life for a while, and then had this opportunity to come to Princeton for what my wife and I thought was going to be 1 year, just to see what the private sector is like. And so I took this job, and the job was at Pinion Research Corporation way back in '56. And now that I look back on it, this whole idea of thinking about this interview, it had that particular job had substantial effect on, for many years, on the way I thought about and behaved in the organization and in the field. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the interface between me and ORC. I was there for 13 years. I was there from 56 to 68 when Reuben Cohen and I left to form another company.
Excuse me, was that after Robinson had retired, or?
No, Robinson...
was he still a presence?
Robinson hired me. He was very much a presence, and everyone grieved when Robinson died in '61. And he died from hepatitis, which he contracted in the Columbia Hospital, where I don't recall what the illness was that got him there. But he was the dominant presiding force at ORC, and had a lot to do with the way I thought about things. There were two characteristics. I had to learn about the business world and ORC. And now that I think about it, a lot of companies in those days were not much different from what I'm going to describe as ORC. There were two tendencies. One was a great deal of attention paid to the business client. And these days we all try to be, or at least there's a posture, certainly, and I think a genuine behavior of trying to present findings and interpret them in a neutral context. It seemed apparent to me, as maybe a little bit feisty when I came there, a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, that at ORC they were attending more to their clients than my tradition had said to me, that one pays attention to the forces that affect the work that we do. So that was one tendency, and that was expressed through a publication, a monthly publication called the Public Opinion Index for Industry, started by Robbie, who was Claude Robinson's nickname. It was the principal product of ORC. It was the only subscription-type product. It provided entree into the public relations offices of a lot of companies and other organizations. And I thought that it pandered to the business community and didn't like to give them information that would turn them off. Mm-hmm. But just thinking about just taking that one tendency, the other one is a kind of a ambivalence toward academic tradition that I noticed also. We had our share of researchers with advanced degrees. Robinson and myself and two other people had...
Joe Hoxton?
Had PhDs. Joe is not there any longer, but in fact it was Joe who was responsible for me applying there. And there were others who had master's degrees, and there were a lot of smart people, but yet the prevailing idea was to push aside academia, except to acknowledge it in Robinson, and to be tough and practical and business-minded. And I can't help but think that there probably are many other companies that were in our field at that time, which some of these tendencies were also available. I don't know. But it did make me more defensive. It made me eventually I saw myself as being the one against the many in a way, as holding up the purity of the tradition, until I got wiser and I realized that all of us go through a phase like that. But ORC did have that effect on me. I can also say that the people that were there taught me a great deal about the field that I was getting into. And the reciprocal part of that was that I did bring some conceptual and even practical things to the company which they never experienced before. I was thinking about the fact that the first study that I did there of any consequence was for an advertising agency that had a client, I think it was the Lane Company, that produced hope chests. And the guys at ORC just didn't quite know what to do with this hope chest client. And they sort of tossed me the job. And I took a camera and I went out and I found a number of girls who owned hope chests and a number of girls who didn't, took their pictures and talked with them about the experience, came back and wrote a report. And suddenly it was like a little eye-opener to them. And we went to the client, and the client loved it. He said, "Oh, I've had a terrible day today. This has happened and that has happened, but this made my day," you know, and I didn't forget that.
What a great feeling.
Yeah, it was wonderful. One of those highs, one of those early highs. And so my career continued at ORC. Eventually I became an officer and a director of the company. And enjoyed the time there. And, you know, I'm trying to remember what the question was that you asked. And
about making the transition.
But that was key to me. The nature of that job was key to me.
Well, you know, you said that ORC might have been typical of a number of research companies in that period, but the Public Opinion Index for Industry was unique in that it interpolated instructions to the business clients as well as research findings. And leaving aside the question of how the research findings jived with the instructions, the failure to make that distinction was I think rather unique in that product, as opposed to services like the Link audit run by the Psychological Corporation, which Henry Link was no less politically conservative than Claude Robinson, but the research findings were kept carefully separate from the instructions or the advice as to where businesses should head.
And it wasn't quite that way. It wasn't that way at all, actually. But it helped Robinson a lot. He took me to meetings of public relations types and officers and would love to jawbone with them. And this was his entree. This was his ticket, the way that he was able to do that.
You referred to the establishment of response analysis when you and Reuben left, and my organization, then the Bureau of Advertising, switched its loyalty from ORC to you guys and your new company. Could you just describe what went through your minds as you and Reuben decided to strike out on your own, and the kind of learning process that you underwent?
Well, I'm sure Reuben would speak for himself and somewhat differently. I think that what we both shared and the occasion for leaving, the trigger, was that the company was sold, and so it was an opportunity to have some small investment that we could then apply somewhere else. But also, I think there was a strain for both of us in the direction of setting up a company that reflected more our own internal values. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did. And I think it was a company that in many ways, although very satisfying to us and to the people that were with us, in many ways, I'm sure that we weren't aware of it, but we also may have kind of acknowledged clients and not been aware that we may have been biased in the direction of clients, although we had a fierce desire not to be. And ORC, from the beginning, we hired some of the people wanted to come with us from, not ORC, but Response Analysis. Some of the people wanted to come with us. Others that we hired all knew that we paid a lot of attention to the research, and we did not consider ourselves to be marketing or sales types. And that's how the company developed, and I think it developed very well under those conditions. So when it was at its best, it was really splendid. And but then, almost inevitably, the price of existence is the need to grow. And in the course of growing, I think we became more commercially oriented than we were at the beginning, and it was good for our revenues. Although Reuben continued to manage, as did I, any number of government contracts which were not characteristic at the place that we had come from. I think if we were successful, and I do think we were to some extent, we made it more of a professionals organization. And so the biases were different biases. I'm sure we had some there.
One of the striking things, if you look at the whole field of research today, is that most of these giant research organizations or research conglomerates are run by people who are not themselves researchers. When you switched roles, as it were, from a purely professional orientation that you had at ORC to this more entrepreneurial, commercial type of role that you had to assume in running a business, what did this do in terms of the way you spent your time or the way you felt about the way your life was organized?
We had a lot to learn in that new domain, and spent a lot of time in a trial and error way learning it. We spent a lot of time keeping our initial investors at bay for any number of years, and they were friends and Princeton citizens, and they'd all done well by making investments in other small companies, and we raised, I've forgotten exactly how much, let's say maybe close to $500,000, something of that kind, mostly in the community. And then we found that we had a whole other public on our hands that we'd never thought about before, and we did have to pay attention to them. And some of them, one or two of them, became part of our board of directors, and others just were very vociferous at annual meetings, so that we learned to put out quarterly reports and annual reports and do all of the nonsense that we really didn't want to do. And that became a part of it. But it's interesting what you say. I was looking at my AAPOR presidential address, and there is a comment in there. There's a reference to an A.C. Nielsen finding that in 1975, about 1/3 of all the companies in the market research business have remote ownership, or that is, the employees and the owners are not the same people. And these days it must be infinitely more in that direction, and it cannot help but have this profound effect on our field, the same way that short-term return and all of the problems that are characteristic of any business enterprise now become characteristic of research.
Well, response analysis certainly followed a familiar route, first selling out to another highly respected research company, Audits and Surveys, run by Saul Dutka, and that company in turn being merged and agglomerated into other even larger and more rapacious entities. Did you, when you decided to sell the business, did you do so with any sense of reluctance, or did you feel that you'd completed a certain stage in your professional career and wanted to move on and do other things?
Let me review what happened.
Yeah.
And that is, in 1986, Reuben decided to retire and became relatively inactive in the business. By 1988, it was clear to me that our top management people, we had 5 excellent vice presidents who were part of the company, were restless, and they wanted a part of the company. And meanwhile, I'd had overtures from Saul Dutka and from a few other places. And what we did instead was to exercise an option that Reuben and I, but mostly Reuben, had put in place in the 1970s, and that was employee ownership, so that we actually sold our company to our employees.
And they were the ones that sold it?
These officers principally, but all employees, and they went to the bank and got a large enough loan to sustain that sale. The bank insisted that I stay on for another 3 years in order to kind of supervise a transition. And after that, I stayed on as a consultant until I went to the university. But that's how it happened. So that we sold the company to our employees, and we're forever pleased that we had done that. And it was they, in turn, about maybe eight years later, or 10 years later, that actually sold to the Roper organization, J.
Wilson.
J. Wilson, right, and Roper. And Roper sold to some British company, which in turn had also an independently bought ASW, Audits and Surveys.
So that merger didn't take place until after?
So that's how that happened. Mm-hmm. And but for me, it was quite a natural thing. I mean, I'd come to the point where, I'd played all the games I wanted to play, and it was an excellent opportunity. I could do this with enormous goodwill, and that is sell my interest to the employee group, and so that seemed to work pretty well, and I think everybody did quite well financially.
Well, really, over the course of your long and remarkable and productive career, you've done a lot of different things and been in a lot of different situations. You started out in teaching, you moved to the ORO, which was had been set up by Johns Hopkins to service the Army.
I put that in because it was in your book.
And you then went on into working in a research company run by somebody else. You moved on to a company that you ran, and then finally set up this research operation at Princeton. So you've been in all these different kinds of settings. In which one would you say, looking back, were you professionally the most productive and personally having the most fun? Or is that an unfair question?
It's a very fair question, and as a matter of fact, I think the best kept secret in all of this is academic life, because I thought being at Princeton was wonderful, partly because it was Princeton, and no meaningful request for finances or support that I knew of was refused. And also because it was fun to teach students, and students who were this smart and who were interested, and for the graduate students, these were people who wanted to put on their resumes something practical that they had done, as well as all of these were mostly from the Woodrow Wilson School, although there were several from psychology and sociology as well. But they did want something on their resumes that was in contrast to the other courses that they had taken. So I had a wonderful time with this research course, and learned a lot, and learned something about my experience in commercial life and also in AAPOR, and that was certainly at ORC and even at RAC, we didn't pay the kind of attention to context effect, to many of the to a hierarchy of effects for reinforcement, to many of the other, to dissonance theory, many of the other things that really drove our field in other ways. It was like a parallelism for a while in AAPOR. I'd like to know how you feel about that, what your experience was. To me, looking back on it, was like a parallelism. There were the academics, and there were commercial people, and I don't know where the government people were, probably a little more on the academic side. But AAPOR has developed somewhat differently. But during the time that I was there, it kind of puzzled me at first when I observed that, I'm living in a somewhat different world. The problems I grapple with and the tools that I bring to bear on clients' problems don't use nearly what's available. And on the other side, I didn't find that the academic people were particularly connecting well with commercial types like myself.
Has that changed over the years? You find going to the AAPOR conferences or reading the POQ, do you feel that there's more of a gap than there was in the past, or less? Or
actually, I do have a sense about that, and that is I'm looking a little more from afar now. I'm not that active in AAPOR and not as involved in the day-to-day business of AAPOR, but I think that there's much more coming together at present than there was at the time when I was kind of starting to look in from the outside and then became a part of the organization. I'd like to know how you feel about that.
Well, we can talk about that later, but what notable changes have you observed in the profession and the practice and the outlook of people in this field?
Certainly at AAPOR, more comparability between the commercial and the non-commercial people. I find that I sense that they pay more attention to each other's papers, that they have more respect for what each other does, and I think this should mean that more of the contribution that each makes is available to the other group. So I think AAPOR is more unified than it was at the time when I first became a member.
Mm-hmm. What year was that? Just
56. That was in Buck Hill Falls.
Mm-hmm.
I was a new member. I didn't know till the next day that there was a big parade through the halls
at midnight. You went to sleep,
and that we were thrown the hell out of there for a period of time. Yeah.
So, in short, you don't feel that the field has really changed character?
Oh, the field has changed character enormously.
Well, how would you describe that?
It's been driven to change character in 2 or 3 events for which the field had very little to do, but then sort of grabbed on and made the best of it. And one was the formats for data collection at the time that I came to, that I was a neophyte, and what they are today. And with that has gone a sense of confidence that at least some of our tests of reliability and some of our ways of feeling confident in the appropriate types of sampling are not quite there anymore. I think we're going through another period where the whole field is in ferment and has not settled out yet. And as between the internet, telephone interviewing, the tremendous antagonism toward telephone interviews, both on the part of the government and on the part of the consumer. And I'm not sure what else. I know that subsidiary things that contributed internally to this were the development of Federal Express and of fax machines, which absolutely changed the relationship that we had with our clients. When they say, now, I want it yesterday, they really want it yesterday. But when they used to say...
that still isn't possible, is it?
But when they said on Friday afternoon or on Thursday afternoon that we want to report tomorrow afternoon, and there was no FedEx and there was no fax, we knew that we had a signal that we better get busy on this, but nothing needed to happen until sometime the next week or whenever we were ready, when we had digested the work. I think it's quite possible that there isn't as much thought given to the back end. And I even noticed at RAC that we had become more of a front-end business and front-end loaded business. That is, conceptualizing and planning and hypothesizing and then data collecting became much more principal events. With that, of course, was because costs were going more into the data collection and to the development of data collection devices, such as telephone centers.
Well, you raised a very important subject about which you know I've been quite exercised, and that is the general deterioration in the quality of what survey researchers are able to get in the way of interviews. Certainly a great deal of controversy these days about internet surveys and the sampling procedures used in them. Do you see any rejection of the survey method in response to all these problems with the validity of the data?
If there's rejection, it seems to me that what the companies in the field and the organizations are actually trying to embrace a new set of, I don't know exactly what to call them, but they're not standards. They're a new way of approaching the field, and out of this may come different ways to collect data. But if there's rejection, it's more in the tremendous noise in the media and in public speeches, where there's a relationship of adopting polls and using polls for one's purpose, polling data and market research data becoming instrumental much more than they used to be, I think, and all of the attendant noise about the controversies over what was not so long ago much more accepted reflection of what the world is like through the reactive method, through consumers talking about products and
am I interpreting you correctly when I summarize what you say as a rejection on the part of the media rather than a rejection on the part of researchers of the methods that they've traditionally employed?
Good. Let me try to clarify that. More of a rejection or more ambivalence and rejection and consternation on the part of the user. And much more of a searching, and if not an acceptance, at least a temporary abiding by and observing what is happening, driven by outside forces as well as driven by the movers in the field right now. So I think they're still trying to accommodate to these changes, and I see this very evident. I'm still active in CASRO as a past chair, and we have meetings, and we have access to and see the CASRO is a trade association for commercial research, and for research that uses interviewing method as a principal data collection or questionnaire method. And I see that evident in the companies, maybe more than in the more amorphous AAPOR, which has so many more constituencies. An attempt to cope and a searching for tomorrow. We were relatively stable as a field with all of the things that go on. We're relatively stable as a field for a period of time. In the early 70s, it was that company in Pennsylvania that introduced telephone interviewing in a big way. And
Sindlinger?
No, not Sindlinger.
Well, Sindlinger.
No, it's a company that became part of ABC. Chilton, it was Chilton, and that I remember someone named Nelson, which Nelson was led a group of us through. It was the first telephone center I had ever seen, and that was in the early 70s. And then, of course, telephone interviewing took off like crazy until it was supplanted by this new upstart of the Internet. Out of this can't help but come something better if we work at it. By better, I mean something that makes survey method more available to a wider constituency of client types. Mm-hmm. Small businesses, non-governmental organizations that could not otherwise afford it, and a better job for those who can't afford it. But right now, though, if we took a snapshot, that's not the way things are, as I see it.
With all of the information that's collected now via the internet and in other ways about individual behavior, individual consumption behavior, and brand preferences and the like, is that likely in any way to substitute for the survey technique that we've been talking about?
It certainly supplements it in a way that store auditing and market research were not antithetical, but market research by means of questionnaires and surveys, but they complemented each other. So I really can't say a lot about that. I'm not that close to that field, but it seems to me that it's much more, it could be much more, if not synergistic, at least mutually reinforcing than it.
What would you say the principal challenges or problems are that confront the field today?
Good question. If there's been a tipping point, I am personally very concerned about the misuse of data from survey research. I think it's become more widespread as the price of entry into the field has been very much reduced, and as we're in this period of ferment and uncertainty about the field. So I'm uneasy about misuses of survey data.
Can you spell that out? What kind of misuses you're talking about? Are you talking about push polls, or are you in politics, or?
Well, I had not been thinking of push polls, but that certainly is one aspect. I was thinking more of the so many entries in the field. The field at once has become more condensed at one end, at the upper end, and at the lower end, there still are a lot of people who make their mark and who get publicity and who have 2 or 3 clients, and that's all fine. But I don't know exactly how to say it, except that I'm very concerned about the misuses of surveys. It's a subject I dealt with in my presidential address, but then it was almost benign. It was there all right, but somehow you knew where it was, and now I'm really concerned.
Does this misuse merely reflect the greater ubiquity of survey results being publicized and posted?
Yeah, in part I think it does. Yeah. It does. People, when a group learns the arcane language, the private language of a discipline, then I say, kind of watch out, because things are not going to get any better. And so people talk about focus groups, they talk about polls in ways that they didn't, because they've learned so much about them. And yet I don't feel confident in a lot of the data that I see for that reason. This is really not coming to grips with what your question is, but it's
you mentioned focus groups, and Bob Merton, who, of course, was the principal author of the focus interview, said to me that one thing that he regretted as being known as the father of focus groups,
right,
in which he expressed his distrust, not as ways of getting juicy qualitative data to illustrate the results of surveys, or to get ideas through which survey questionnaires could be constructed, but as an independent source of information. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, the image that you bring to me is, there was a time when I was working for 2 years off and on while I was at Princeton with a political science professor who happened to be black, and she had a substantial grant and was studying educational opportunity for black students. And we were doing it through little experiments and other things, and also through focus groups. And I went with her to this focus group, and Bob Merton was there. And she had invited him, and he came. So he and I sat through, on the one-way mirror, we sat through a focus group together, and he was respectful and a little bit distant. And I don't know what was in his mind. He was a very pleasant guy, and I enjoyed talking with him. So I don't know where Bob Merton would come out on focus groups. And actually, when his book came out in paperback, on the back cover there, I'm one of the people that writes a little a squib about how great it is, and which I actually believe. But I suppose that wasn't where he thought he was going to go.
No, certainly not. Not where he wanted it to end up.
I don't know how our time is going.
Well,
I would like to say a few things that maybe you would do with me about AAPOR as an organization.
Please go ahead.
Because when Janet and I were at this Heritage Committee meeting at AAPOR, someone in the group started to, in a way that I thought showed a lack of understanding more than anything else, who was a person who was not present in the early days when I was, sort of putting down the AAPOR hotels. Oh, there were a bunch of flea bag hotels, and AAPOR always met in these cheap places, and everybody laughed. And I said to myself, I tucked it away, and I said, someday I'm going to say something about this. And what I think a future generation should know was that there was a plan in place there, and that Joe Clapper, and maybe someone before Joe was the local arrangements chairman for so many years, there was either, and maybe you can help with this, either a formal council resolution or an understanding that the AAPOR Hotel would always be a modestly priced activity to attract students and to attract university types who didn't have the scratch and weren't able to get it. And so for many years, in fact, I was hugely surprised. I'm looking at Janet now. I was hugely surprised all of a sudden to find, boy, what a classy place we're going to. I don't remember how many years ago that was, but things have changed in that extent. Of course, we've all gotten, I guess, students have gotten better off than they were. But anyway, there was a rationale for it, and that's one of the things I wanted to bring up about AAPOR, my own observations at the beginning. And that is, I guess everyone, or maybe has Dick Baxter been interviewed?
No.
Not yet, okay. I think it was Dick that was instrumental in moving the presidential address from the evening to lunchtime with what I believe has been turned out to be excellent effect, because people are still awake, and because it's a time that deserves that unit of attention that someone has been working on for all of this time, and it leaves the evening for frivolous things. And I think that, unless you have some other recollection, I think it was Dick that started that.
I don't recall who started it, but yeah. I don't agree with you.
You'll have your chance. See, what else about AAPOR? Oh, yes, AAPOR was a private. As a stranger to AAPOR, I found it a very private place at first. Parties were in people's rooms, and people who knew each other had parties, and they invited others to have parties, and pretty soon I became a party goer too. But at first it was a party giver, but it wasn't that friendly at first. You were either on the inside or you weren't on the inside, and it never bothered me at the beginning, because this is how it is. I mean, this is how the organization is. But I'm so glad that it became a much different situation later on.
Just one last question, Herb. Unless there's something else about AAPOR that you wanted to cover.
I think I've probably got most of that.
You mentioned Claude Robinson, and you mentioned Bob Merton. Are there any other people that in the course of your professional career stand out as memorable influences on your own professional achievement?
And on the profession generally. Hans Zeisel is very big in my mind. I think that Hans had an enormous influence. He didn't do it in a frontal way, but he had an enormous influence on our field. I think that, I'm trying to think of one of the guys that was a founder of Westat.
Jim Seiler.
Jim Seiler was the ABC.
Jim Seiler started Arbitron, which I believe became Westat at some later point. But that's a point of fact that can be checked.
Is that right? Okay. In fact, I knew Jim at NBC. I was a graduate student then. He had just started an NBC diary service. He kind of began to develop the diary method at that time. And we visited a couple of times, and we talked, and I think I may have done some diary placement with him or some interview with that. But let's see, other really momentous people in the field. Well, I mean, there's some that are so obvious. Paul Lazarsfeld is an enormous presence in our field, and I'm sure there are so many others, and I don't want to leave them out.
Anything else that you want to add at this point?
Just a moment. microphone over to you. Make one more comment that I think one of the kind of enduring and hard to give up concepts of the commercial field when I was in it is that information changes attitudes. And later on, when we all became a little more sophisticated, I actually did quite well in selling. I wasn't much of a salesman, but I could get up there and turn charts.
You're a hell of a salesman.
When I would go up in front of a group, I remember most recently it was a while back, but it was the Ford Motor Company, and it's almost like dropping a bombshell still when you say that information doesn't change attitudes. And then, of course, you have to explain yourself and have to be a little more indirect about it. But I was trying to think of the 3 or 4 kind of things that seemed to me to be strange aspects of the different ways of thought of our clients and ourselves. That was one of them. Okay, I'm going to sign off here.
Okay.